These Navy men were about to face something far worse than they ever imagined, all because of a strange submarine that showed up out of nowhere. The day started off just like any other for the crew of the Orion, a Coast Guard vessel patrolling about 3 miles off the coast. It was a routine mission, the kind they'd done dozens of times before. Their job was simple: keep the waters safe and check out anything unusual. For the crew, men and women used to life at sea, danger was part of the job. Even though they were well-trained and experienced, they never forgot how unpredictable the ocean could be. Over the years, they'd learned to respect it, and to fear it a little, too. The sea had always held its secrets, some darker than people wanted to believe. The skies were clear, the waters calm. But that peace could change fast, and today it wasn't a storm that would shake them. It was what they found beneath the still surface, something no one expected. Everything was normal until one of the radar operators spotted something odd. A faint sound picked up by the sonar, barely noticeable on the screen. At first, they figured it was just a glitch, some random noise. But since they were nearby, they decided to check it out anyway. As they headed in that direction, one of the crew members spotted something strange on the horizon, a bright blue shape in the water. From far away, it could have been anything: floating debris, maybe a small boat. But the closer they got, the more off it seemed. Its surface was metallic blue, almost like it was built to blend into the ocean. It was hard to spot unless you were looking straight at it. That kind of design wasn't typical. It looked like something made for secret missions or surveillance. Even weirder, their radar couldn't track it properly. 1 second it was there, the next it was gone, like it was slipping in and out of existence. The only thing the radar showed clearly was their own ship. There were no signs on it, no lights, no movement. It didn't respond to any of their radio calls, not even static, just silence. The crew couldn't tell if it was abandoned or hiding something worse. As they moved in closer, the details came into view. It was bigger than they thought. Its shape was long, smooth, and unfamiliar, definitely not any kind of vessel they recognized. The captain made the call. Get closer and check it out. They followed standard procedure, throwing out a line with a hook to latch onto the object and tow it toward their ship. But even with their training and coordination, the object didn't budge. Instead, something strange happened. When they pulled, it was the Orion that began to drift toward it. That's when they realized it was way heavier than they'd expected. With that in mind, the captain made a call. He sent 2 of his crew, Brendan and John, to board the strange vessel and check it out. Carrying flashlights, tools, and radios, the 2 Coast Guardsmen climbed onto the surface of the object. Up close, its design looked even more unusual. As they walked along the metal deck, they came across a hatch near the top. Carefully, Brendan and John opened it. The lid let out a deep creak that echoed in the still air, revealing a narrow passage inside. They shined their lights down and saw a rusty ladder leading into the dark. They hesitated for a second, exchanged a look, then started to climb down. The deeper they went, the more it felt like they'd stepped into a forgotten submarine. It was cold and heavy with silence, the metallic smell strong in the air. Every step echoed off the damp metal walls, which were coated in rust and moisture, as if no one had touched this place in years. The outside might have looked solid, but inside the air felt thick and strange, almost like something more than air was pressing down on them. Their flashlights lit up what looked like a main control panel. It was old school, full of levers, buttons, and wires that looked like something from the 1980s. It was clear people had been here before, but oddly, there was no sign of anyone left behind. No bodies, no mess, not even clues about what the sub's mission had been. Then, out of nowhere, a sharp sound echoed above them. Both men snapped their heads up, just in time to hear the hatch slam shut with a bang. They rushed to their radios, trying to call the Orion, but nothing came through. Total silence. Back on the Orion, the rest of the crew could do nothing. The hatch had sealed tight, cutting off all contact with Brendan and John. That's when the submarine started to hum, not shaking, but vibrating steadily. The two men felt it immediately, and before they could fully process it, the whole vessel began to sink. Slowly, silently, but with purpose. Inside, they could feel the pressure building around them. Meanwhile, on the Orion, the crew watched in disbelief as their monitors went blank. First, the radar signal flickered, then vanished completely. Their teammates had disappeared into the deep, and there was nothing anyone could do to stop it. The fear on board was real, but imagining what Brendan and John were facing was even worse. Inside the sub, the two men tried to stay calm. They kept moving, searching for answers. What struck them as odd was how quiet everything was. No rushing water, no creaking metal, no signs the submarine was breaking apart. That alone gave them a tiny bit of comfort. Brendan looked closely at the walls and controls, thinking hard. Suddenly, it hit him. This whole thing was designed to stay hidden. John nodded. They'd figured that from the start, but now Brendan seemed to truly grasp what that meant. As they searched further, they came to a thick metal door at the end of the hallway. Behind it, they hoped, might be the answers they were looking for. Or maybe something far worse. Hours passed, and the sub kept quietly moving deeper underwater. Brendan and John kept moving through the dim corridors, their nerves growing with every step. The air felt heavier now, probably because whatever oxygen the sub had was slowly running out. As they moved through the cold, metallic passages, it started to feel like they were going in circles. Frustrated, they decided to check out the machinery. Maybe there was still a way to trigger something that could bring the sub back up. But the tech was old and basic. Control panels with exposed wires, sealed compartments with no clear function. It all looked like something pulled from decades ago. Then the sub vibrated again, just slightly. But this time, it felt different. It almost seemed like the submarine was rising. For a moment, that gave them some hope. Still, something about it didn't feel right. There were no signs of damage or flooding. It was too calm. And in the stillness, the shadows in the corners began to play tricks on them. That's when they found something strange, a hidden panel covered in thick dust. They pried it open with a loud creak. Inside was gear that looked military in nature, clearly not for civilian use and clearly old. The labels suggested it had been stored here a long time, but what grabbed their attention even more was a large sealed box tucked behind everything else. It didn't look like a supply container. Driven by curiosity, they opened it. What they found made their stomachs drop. Bundles wrapped in black plastic, clearly marked. It didn't take much to figure out what it was. Drugs. A lot of them. Suddenly, everything made sense. The strange design, the silence, the hidden tech. This sub had been used for smuggling, probably abandoned after something went wrong. At first, they assumed their growing unease was just the shock of realizing the truth. Maybe the thick air and the shaking were just part of their anxiety. But they were wrong. The air was getting thin because oxygen was running low. And the vibrations? Those weren't random. They were the signs that the sub was moving again, rising faster now, heading for the surface. For a second, they felt relief. Maybe they were about to be rescued. But then the sub broke through the water, and what they saw was beyond anything they could have imagined. In front of them stood a massive floating platform, surrounded by endless sea. It looked like an offshore oil rig, only larger and more imposing. There was no land anywhere, not even on the horizon. The isolation was terrifying, but it was the platform's sheer size and presence that made their hearts race. Terrified, Brendan and John ducked down behind the control console, trying not to make a sound. They heard the sound of men climbing aboard, voices, heavy boots, metal tools scraping on steel. The hatch opened with loud bangs as workers from the rig entered the sub. Soon, the crew began unloading heavy crates and moving them to the platform. It was clearly a well-practiced operation, done slowly but with confidence. Brendan and John stayed frozen in place, barely breathing. They couldn't do anything except wait, hoping they wouldn't be seen, and praying the sub would eventually be left alone. All they could do was watch as more and more crates were piled up outside. Brendan and John watched in growing horror. The cargo being unloaded wasn't just equipment or supplies. It was piles of cash and drugs, all clearly illegal and tied to a massive criminal operation. The rig workers moved with calm focus, like this was just another day on the job. But for the two Coast Guardsmen, it was like stepping into a nightmare. This world was nothing like anything they'd ever trained for. They knew one wrong move could mean the end, not just of the mission, but of their lives. Despite their training, they were just two men, surrounded by many. It was a bad situation. This wasn't the fear of drowning or getting lost at sea. It was something worse. The fear of being caught, of being tortured for what they knew. What made it worse was that their military status meant they couldn't just be scared off or let go. If the smugglers found them, they'd be killed without hesitation. Their only option was to stay completely invisible. They couldn't make a sound, couldn't leave even the slightest trace. All they could do was wait in the shadows, hoping they would stay just that. Shadows. Hidden. Forgotten. One thing was clear. They had to get out. The urge to escape was growing stronger by the second. They were witnessing something no one was ever supposed to see. But where could they go? They were stuck in the middle of the ocean. Swimming wasn't even an option. Their best hope was to wait. Let the workers finish loading the next shipment, then try to sneak away, maybe once the sub left for land. The good news was they had proof now. If they could get the sub seized or plant a tracker, they'd have enough to expose everything. Still, hiding meant constant risk. At any moment, a crate could shift, a shadow could move, and they'd be caught. They felt the weight of time pressing down on them. A bolder choice would be to leave their hiding spot and explore the platform. Maybe find a boat and escape. But that was a huge gamble, risky either way. And their window was closing. In the end, they decided to take the risk. They left the safety of the shadows and moved cautiously, hoping to gather info, anything to help reinforcements. Stepping out, they found themselves on a massive steel structure lit up by blinding lights. The ocean around them was pure black, and the sound of waves crashing against the metal legs was overwhelming. They finally realized what this place was, an old oil rig now used for smuggling. But here's where things changed. They were above sea level now. That meant their radios might work. Staying low and careful, they searched for a safe place to send a message. If they could do it without being seen, help might come quickly. They moved quietly, staying out of sight while the workers stayed focused on moving crates. The whole operation seemed to be managed by one man, a sharply dressed figure who stood out from the rest. The platform wasn't crowded. It was clear this wasn't a full-time base, just a transfer point. There weren't even communication tools on board. That told them the real controllers were somewhere else. With this information, they made the call. They contacted their ship, letting them know everything they had seen. Luckily, they weren't far from the coast, and there weren't many oil rigs in this area. It wasn't hard to figure out where they were. Now it was a matter of waiting. And then they saw it. The smugglers started to panic. The Coast Guard ship was closing in fast. The whole place turned to chaos. The smugglers shouted, threatened to open fire, and tried to stop the ship. But it was too late. The Coast Guard didn't back down. In the end, the smugglers gave up. The authorities arrested them, shut the operation down, and took control. Brendan and John made it out alive. They were hailed as heroes, and after everything they'd been through, they finally got to go home. Thanks for following the story to the end. If you enjoyed it, Be sure to like, share, and subscribe for more intense true story breakdowns like this one. Your support helps us keep bringing you wild, real-life missions you won't believe.